You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is Leslie Jones. Thank you so much for faithfully tuning in. I really appreciate it. I haven't asked in a while, but if you'll look in the right-hand sidebar, you'll see some handy links where you can subscribe to the show. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, even YouTube, everywhere that you listen to the show, you can subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Please do that for me if you will. I'd like to thank some sponsors. Our wonderful, faithful sponsors are the ones that make this show possible, and I really appreciate them, and I hope that you, the listeners, will go visit these sponsors and not only show them that you appreciate them supporting the show, but they are the best of the best. That's why they sponsor Author Stories. Daniel Kinney is the best middle grade author I've ever known. His Project Gemini is a 10-book series involving the characters Pirate Ninja, Lovable Loser, Lunchmeat Lenny, and Olive Klein. They are distinct characters, each with their own separate stories, but all the stories exist within the same fictional universe. Start with Pirate Ninja. By day, a normal, quiet kid. By night, America's newest crime fighter. A brave superhero known to friend and foe as Pirate Ninja. Project Gemini by Daniel Kinney. Bakira Brumley is a speculative fiction writer making stuff up on a trampoline in West Texas. When she's not playing with the quirky characters in her head, she's addicted to Twitter pitch events, writing contests, and social media in general. She is one of the best writers I know, writing fantasy and sci-fi and doing some really, really cool, amazing things. There's a link to her Amazon page where you can get plugged in with any number of projects she's involved with right now. Thank you to Bakira Brumley. The Honoria series by Patricia Gilliam. When an Earth-based terrorist group targets Honoria's ambassador, two teenagers become entrapped in the conflict. Alex Varon is the son of an Earth Independence Party representative and doesn't want to follow his father's path of political manipulation and corruption. Rika Miller is the adopted daughter of an engineer and nurse who later discovers she's not human, but Honorian. Alex must decide between his family loyalties and saving the life of an alien he's been taught to fear and hate, while Rika searches for the truth of what happened to her birth parents. It's the Honoria series by Patricia Gilliam. Book 1, Out of the Gray. Go pick it up today. There's a link in the show notes. Thanks to editor extraordinaire Crystal Watanabe from Pico's House. She's one of the best editors working today. She's worked with bestsellers like Hugh Howey and Samuel Peralta and is in demand for her unique insights into genre fiction and her ability to make an author's words ring true the way the author intended. Visit Crystal at picoshouse.com for her full range of services. You will not be disappointed. Crystal is the best. Also, there's a new collection from Project Entertainment Network, My Favorite Story Podcast Author Anthology. 15 podcast hosts and authors share their favorite short stories they've ever written. Folks like Christopher Gold and Brian King, James A. Moore, Jay Wilburn, Chuck Buda, Jonathan Mayberry, Armand Rosamilia, Jamie Ingle, some of the biggest authors all in one epic release. It includes a brief Why Is This My Favorite Story section from each author. It's the Project Entertainment Network presents My Favorite Story Podcast Author Anthology. Also, the new series by Craig Martell and Scott Moon, Assignment Dark Landing, the Dark Landing series. Book 1, Assignment Dark Landing, is out. Book 2, Ike Shot the Sheriff, is also out now. This is a fun series. If you love sci-fi, if you love genre bending and genre mixing, this is like Firefly meets Tombstone. This series is incredible. By Craig Martell and Scott Moon, the Dark Landing series. A frontier world, one sheriff, all the action one spaceport can't hold. Dark Landing is the wild, wild west of known space. Go check out Book 1 and Book 2 now, Assignment Dark Landing and Ike Shot the Sheriff. As always, at the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thank you for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Leslie Jones on the show with me today. And Leslie has a new book that is coming out very soon called Framed, a Duty and Honor novel. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Hank, for having me.
I'm excited to have you this morning, and I know we have a lot to talk about, but before we can do anything, we begin the show with the same question each time, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
I'm one of those writers who started to write almost before I could walk. I've been a huge reader my whole life. I was a huge reader as a kid. I completed my first quote-unquote first full-length novel when I was 11 years old. It was 49 pages, handwritten. It was a Hardy Boys knockoff, and it was really terrible. It was really, really bad.
So it was your first desk drawer novel?
Yes, it was. And then from there, I've taken this huge circuitous route. I finished my second novel at 16, and that one was a contemporary romance, because I was reading a lot of romance at that point. And then jump forward to 26, when I wrote a fantasy novel. And of course, none of those should ever see the light of day. Those are in a drawer somewhere, complete practice. Then jump through a lot of years of military service, of traveling around the world as a military spouse, working. I was an IT geek for a while. And when we finally moved out to Arizona, my husband sat me down and said, look, you have wanted to be a writer your entire life. You can come home from the workforce now. I can bring you home. Now's the time to do it. Now you can do whatever it is you want to do. So I started writing full-time in 2010. And what I was writing then was the first novel in my Duty and Honor series, which is Night Hush.
One of my favorite things about talking to writers is hearing the circuitous route that gets them to where they are, because the rare exception of authors' stories is that the rare thing is that they only ever pursued writing. And there's a handful of those people that's the only thing they ever wanted to do. That's the only thing they ever attempted to do. And, they found, success eventually, but the only thing they ever pursued was writing, and got a novel published in college, but that is a rare exception. Most people are like you and I, and we work IT for a while, we do this for a while, and we're trying to find that path that we eventually wind up at. Did you ever think that you would be a full-time writer, or was this just a hobby that you just loved and you were okay with it being a hobby?
I have always wanted to be a published author. When I was in my 20s in college, I was studying comparative literature, so we were reading a lot of literary classics and the great American novel. And at that point, of course, I wanted to write the great American novel. I think the reason a lot of successful authors take the circuitous route is because at 20, I didn't have enough life experience to be a credible author. I didn't have anything to say because I didn't know anything.
Yeah, I agree, and that's another one of those rare rules that and as soon as you say that no one has life experience at 20, then there's this 20-year-old that writes an amazing book. But I like to think that when you've kind of been around a little bit, you become a better reporter on the human condition because you've actually encountered humans. And, seeing how kind of the world works. Not that that's a hard and fast rule, but it does tend to be that way.
I agree.
Yeah. I love that you wrote a fantasy novel. There are so many romance authors that I've talked to, or military thriller authors, or, people that write things that are so far separated from what we think fantasy is. And a lot of them started writing, a fantasy novel. I absolutely love that. What is it about fantasy that endeared you?
I think the magic of it all.
Yeah.
We all want to experience something greater than ourselves, I think. And there's something about fantasy, elves and magic and sword fights that is appealing. I think the appeal of fantasy in people in general, because it's a popular subgenre, is the magic of it, the otherworldliness of it, the other species, elves and dwarves and halflings and hobbits living among us, that it takes us out of our daily grind. It gives us something to wish for, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's fun. People go to Renaissance festivals because they like to be in that other timey atmosphere, sword fights and armor and, fair maidens in their wonderful dresses. I know it appeals to me.
Yeah. And I think, when you read fantasy or when you sit down to write fantasy, it's almost like you're giving yourself permission to have fun. If you're sitting down to write serious literature, then, there are certain expectations you put on yourself. But if you sit down and you say, well, this story's going to have an elf in it, well, automatically, kind of all bets are off and, let's have fun with it.
I think that's a fantastic way of putting it. You just nailed what I was trying to say.
Another thing that I found to be fairly common among writers is a lot of them have worked in IT. Do you find anything about those two things, writing and working with technology and computers, that are complementary, or do you think they are kind of opposites, and writing is an escape from that analytical part of ourself?
Well, I wasn't aware that a lot of writers have worked in IT. I think the two are complete opposites, and I think if other writers are in such a binary field, it works or it doesn't work, then writing is a great escape from that. I love being in IT. I loved working with computers. I couldn't operate a copy machine to save my life, but I could make a computer sit up and dance. But yeah, to me, it's the polar opposite of the creativity that goes into writing a book. Right.
What did you do in the military?
I was in military intelligence, Army intelligence.
Ooh, that sounds exciting.
It was. I'm one of those people who is frankly kind of nosy. I like to know what's really going on behind the scenes, and having access to that classified information allowed me to know what was really going on, so I could react better to it. When I was in Korea, mostly what I was doing was counterterrorism. And then when I was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, I was a platoon for the interrogators, the interrogation platoon. And those were the interrogators who went during the first Gulf War, who Saudi Arabia and advisors and the POWs and the deserters. And I am so extremely proud of the job they did. They did an amazing job. They were amazing people, and I was so honored to serve with them.
Wow. When you came home and as a full-time writer, like you told us earlier, what were some of those first stories that you started writing?
Actually, Night Hush was the first story I started writing.
Okay.
It was in my head. All of my books start out with either a single line of dialogue or a single line of exposition, or a vague scene that's in my head or something like that. Night Hush, all I had was the very first line. He would come again. That was a given. And that's all I knew. And a brief, vague sense of Heather, my protagonist, captured by a terrorist and in a prison cell. And that's where the book started.
Wow. That's awesome. Your books are a really interesting blend of military thriller and romance. How do you first off, is that a genre that already existed, and was this something you were already reading, or is this just your life experience and this is the way the story came out?
This is a legitimate subgenre of romance. Technically, what I write is military suspense with strong romantic elements. That's how HarperCollins categorizes me. One of my favorite authors is Suzanne Brockman, and right now she's the reigning queen of military romance. So, yeah, there are other authors out there. Unfortunately, in my experience, there are fewer authors who can capture the true feel and flavor of the military mindset while they're writing military stories. And I have definite opinions about what they should and shouldn't be doing, but
yeah. Well, and I think a lot of authors really ought to pay better attention. I don't usually write military scenes because I didn't serve, and I don't really have I don't have the grasp on it that I feel like an author should. And you being immersed in that world, I would think that you can report on that in a way that that folks that are coming to it from a different angle can't and maybe shouldn't.
I agree with you. I think it's impossible to accurately reflect the military mindset by using Google, for example.
Right.
You can research and strategy, rank structure, the customs and courtesies, but unless you yourself are a veteran or you sit down and interview soldiers or observe them interacting with one another, you'll miss understanding how they see the world. For example, if you ask any soldier for an example of the most realistic movie depicting basic training, 9 out of 10 of them will tell you to watch the first half of Full Metal Jacket. That's a Stanley Kubrick movie. So regardless of when they served, from World War II to now, every one of them can recognize their drill sergeant in the gunnery sergeant Hartman, who is the drill sergeant in Full Metal Jacket. And every one of them can point to the screw up in their platoon because every platoon has one. So I think, I don't think you need to go through basic training to understand this shared military cultural memory, but it does require you to look at how soldiers react to situations differently than civilians do.
Right. I would think that this is a popular genre and probably growing in popularity, being that we have so many veterans that have been active duty in the last, almost a generation now. We've been involved in conflict somewhere, and we need these stories that tell us not only what's happening on the front lines, but then the human stories of the soldiers and then how they're interacting in their real life as well. Do you see this as or do you get a lot of feedback from readers that these stories really connect with them?
I do get a lot of feedback, especially my female readers like the romantic parts. And that's great. And they also enjoy the suspense parts. My male readers, especially those who are veterans, have given me feedback that I've absolutely nailed the interaction of these special forces or the special operators. And that, I've gotten it right, which is a huge honor that they're reading it, that they're commenting back. My first book, Night Hush, somehow ended up being circulated in the spec ops community. And and I was so honored that the feedback I got from that was that I got it right.
So what is the story of Night Hush? You told us the beginning line that you had, and then you introduced us to your protagonist. But what is the story that unfolded there?
In this gripping and action-packed debut, an Army intelligence officer and a Delta Force soldier must race against the clock to stop a catastrophic terrorist attack. When Army intelligence officer Heather Langstrom's military convoy is ambushed and she's taken prisoner, she knows she'll need all her strength and courage to survive, escape her captors, and report the whispers of unrest brewing in the Middle East. Delta Force Captain Jace Reed isn't one to throw caution to the wind, but when his team stumbles upon beaten and weak Heather fleeing the terrorist training camp they've been dispatched to destroy, he'll risk everything to get her to safety. Once back on base, they learn her convoy's ambush was no accident. She's been targeted. As the evidence pending attack mounts, Jace and Heather uncover a deadly terrorist plot that could kill hundreds of civilians. But Jace's protective instincts and Heather's fierce independence put them at constant odds. And as they close in on the extremists, they must learn to trust one another in order to save innocent lives, even if it means sacrificing their own.
I love it. When you're imagining a story like this, you said that you normally start with a snippet of a scene or a piece of exposition. How does the story start unfolding for you then when you start sitting down and imagining how it's going to unfold? Are you a planner, or do you plan the book out ahead of time, or do you just start writing and kind of follow the story as it goes?
I'm a plotter. I'm a plotter by nature. Night Hush was written as what they call a pantser, written by the seat of my pants. And I got stuck so many times in the what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. So it really slowed down the crafting of the story and the production of the story. So for Bait, the second book, I wrote out a very detailed 10-page synopsis on what was going to happen. And the writing proceeded much more smoothly from that point. Things changed, obviously. I mean, it did not stay static.
Right.
The story grew organically. But because I had a skeleton there, when it came time to put on the bones, I wasn't constantly getting stuck on, wait, what happens next?
Right.
So I am a plotter by nature. What I do now is before I even start writing word one, I write out a very detailed biography of my hero, heroine, and villain. And then I write the detailed synopsis.
Do you find that it helps you that it helps the story along when you've established the background of the character and you kind of understand how these three main people are going to interact in this world?
Absolutely. And that's why I do it. If you start writing a story and you really don't know your characters very well, it's hard to judge how they're going to react authentically in a situation. And my feeling is by the time you get to the end of the story and actually know your characters and understand their motivations and their goals and, the conflicts inside them, you're going to have to go back to the beginning and do a whole lot of editing and rewriting, because none of that would come through at the beginning of the novel because you didn't know your characters.
Right. Absolutely. How long did it take you to write Night Hush, that first book in the Duty and Honor series?
4 years.
Wow.
Well, yes, because I had no contract, and I was a lot of stops and starts, a lot of false starts, and more circuitous routes. But 4 years, it was actually about 14 months to write it, about another 5 or 6 months to revise and edit it. Then I started sending out query letters to agents, and when I signed with my agent, she went through it and suggested a lot of edits and revisions, which I did. And then when she sold the book to HarperCollins, my editor then wanted a lot of revisions and changes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Right. So from start to publication, it was 4 years, and then Bait I did in 8 months.
Right. Probably because well, I'll let you speak, but what do you think changed from that first book to the second book?
Oh,
in your writing, how do you think your writing process changed?
That was when I had to buckle down and be serious about the plotting portion. I no longer had the luxury of, well, let me explore what happens if this, and let me write this whole 3 chapters that have nothing to do with anything and are going to have to be cut anyway. I had a deadline, and I don't like deadlines. I hate deadlines. But there you go. You have a contract, you have a deadline, and you have to produce.
Yeah. They keep you honest, don't they?
Yes, they do. They keep you accountable. Accountability is good. I have no complaints over it whatsoever. For me, accountability is a good thing.
Yeah. So the first book was Night Hush. The second was Bait. The third, Deep Cover. And your new book is called Framed. Are you following the same, because this is a series, the Duty and Honor series. Are you following the same characters, or are these new stories with each book?
They're new stories with each book. They're each standalones and don't have to be read in order. What I end up doing is the secondary or even tertiary characters in one book become the main characters in the next book. Okay.
So you're following a group of people, and the focus is just shifting?
Correct.
Okay. All right. What is that group that you're following?
I have a dedicated group of Delta Force special operators, and you see them grow as characters and interact as characters, and then usually my heroine is, I'm sorry, oh Lord. Usually my heroine is either another military person or a civilian who you don't follow from story to story, but who appear in subsequent stories. So, for example, Heather, who is the heroine in Night Hush, appears in Framed, but not as the main character.
Well, that's a really fun way to do it. You get to have a cast of characters, but keep the focus shifting around. Do you hear from readers that they like the way that you're doing that?
I've heard from readers that, for example, Framed follows the story of Lark, Hadley, Larkspur, who first appeared in Deep Cover, and I had a lot of feedback of, I want Lark to have her own story. She's an amazing character. Write her story. So I did.
I love that. But because you are following Delta Force and you're putting these characters in unique situations each time, do you ever worry about getting a little too close to actual world events and that it being a little too real?
I don't worry about that for 2 reasons. One, I've never been in combat. I've never been a special operator, obviously. So there are going to be things that I just will not know in terms of jargon, in terms of tactics and strategy, in terms of mindset. I can extrapolate. I have some friends who have done some things who have been able to tell me very bare bones stories, and because of my experiences, I've been able to extrapolate to say, hey, this is probably what happened. But to actually know exactly how it's going to play out in the real world, no, I don't know that. The other reason I'm not concerned is I think a lot of other writers of military stories, I deliberately put in some inaccuracies in there. And while in general inaccuracies in military books drive me nuts, I understand, as I think these other authors understand, that you don't want to be so close to reality that you can give your enemies information that you don't want them to have.
Sure. I think that makes perfect sense. The new book is called Framed. What do you get your cast of characters up to in this book?
Well, Framed follows the story of Lark, who is framed by an unknown entity for stealing millions and millions of dollars of money from the mafia. So they're after her. That's just the beginning, though, because while she's trying to track down this money, she unexpectedly discovers another terrible plot, one that could mean the death for thousands. So she finds out that criminals have stolen something a lot worse than money, and they're about to sell it to the highest bidder.
Ooh, so you introduce a kind of an organized crime element to this book. That had to be fun to do.
It was a lot of fun to do, and it's funny. I was listening last night to your interview with Brad Taylor, whose books I had not read, and who impressed me so much during this interview that I went and bought his new book.
He was a lot of fun.
He was, and he's incredibly talented, and he has that special operations background. I am only able to do so much research on Google. I am a very good researcher, and I know how to find things that a lot of other people can't. So in the course of doing a lot of research on organized crime and the mob, I found out some really, really interesting snippets that I kind of tried to integrate into the book because it fascinated me.
Right. What was one thing that you discovered that took you completely off guard?
For example, during World War II, during World War II, when, I'm sorry, give me a second. Okay, I can't remember his name. That's why I'm hesitating. Okay. During World War II in Boston, let me try again. During World War II in New York, the mob controlled the docks of New York. And they agreed because even though they were mobsters, they were patriots, some of them. And they agreed to keep the ports open, not to have any demonstrations or shutdowns for the duration of the war. They agreed to keep these ports open and actually guard them so that American warships could moor there safely, which I found extremely interesting because one doesn't normally think of mobsters as patriots, and yet they were.
Those make awesome characters. Any character that is, one-dimensional. Oh, they're mobsters. They're automatically bad guys. If you can say, oh, but they were patriots and actually helped the effort, that makes a really interesting character.
I thought so. And I did incorporate that snippet into my mob villain's psyche. So he's the one who told this story because he is also portraying himself as a patriot.
That's awesome. So the new book is called Framed. It's the fourth in the Duty and Honor series. Amazon says that there's 5 books in the series. Is there another book coming after Framed?
There is not. Framed is the last book in the Duty and Honor series. I'm really excited right now because I'm about to start a brand new series that I'm tentatively calling The Hard Chargers. And I'm working on the first book of that second series now. So the Duty and Honor series is over with the 4 books, and then I'm starting a new series with the Hard Chargers. The difference between the 2 series is the duty and honor books mostly take place overseas, and they mostly, in general, have one military hero and a civilian heroine. In this new series, The Hard Chargers, both the hero and heroine are going to be military, and it's all going to take place domestically rather than overseas. But it's still going to have the good Delta Force characters, and it's still going to be action-packed and hopefully very exciting.
Oh, I can't wait to see what you do with that. That's going to be awesome. Leslie, if people are just being introduced to your work now, where can they find you online?
They can always find me on my website, which is lesliejonesbooks.com. They can find me on Facebook, Leslie Jones Books, or Twitter, or I think I'm even on Instagram. Or they're actually welcome to email me directly if they have any questions or feedback or complaints that they want to address at leslie@lesliejonesbooks.com.
Awesome. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of Framed, the newest book in the Duty and Honor series. Leslie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Summer waned. The sun still kissed the waters of the Hudson, but less passionately, like a bride having second thoughts. The days grew a minute shorter, the shadows a millimeter longer, and fear descended upon Sleepy Hollow just as imperceptibly. Even in the heat of July, when the town still wore shorts and sandals, when it still carried ice chests and pressed beers to its forehead, when its children played in sand piles and its old men sat talking baseball. Bad things began to happen. Everywhere, it seemed. On the afternoon of July 10th, 2 Terrytown women went shopping at the Barnes stationery store. Both reached for the last package of lace wedding invitations at the same time. Their confrontation ended with bloody fists and an ambulance ride. On July 14th, Larry Putnam choked on a California spring roll at Andy Ng's Japanese sushi restaurant on Beekman Avenue. The following Saturday, Judy Jessup found Gypsy, her daughter's black cat, dead, strung up on the fence behind their house, just dangling there, eyes open and fangs bared. Come sunset, fireflies hung thick above the lawns of the hollow. Red eyes peered through the shutters of abandoned houses. A mist rose from the parched earth and hung low, especially behind the old Dutch church, among the graves of the ancient burying ground. The old Croton Aqueduct Trail, usually a summer playground, grew eerily empty. Hardly anyone walked there, especially at night, when gnarled branches held hands and rustled to each other around cauldron clearings of moonlight. Those who did so reported strange attacks, gossamer apparitions, and the distant sound of horses' hooves. 11 years prior, after the GM plant had closed, when the village of North Terrytown had been rechristened Sleepy Hollow, it had seemed natural to adopt the horseman as town mascot. He appeared on the badges of the police officers, on the sides of the fire trucks, on the menus of restaurants, on the stationery of the mayor. He arose from his grave as a tchotchke in the gift shops. He haunted the helmets of the football team, the windows of the bike shop, the rings presented to outgoing seniors. The black-cloaked figure of the headless horseman manifested everywhere, ubiquitous as Mickey Mouse in the Magic Kingdom, and almost as subliminal. People had grown used to the horseman, fond of him even. Eventually they had ceased to notice him. They noticed him now. And they noticed him everywhere. On hats and collar pins and park signs, on cars and buses, on statues, on plaques, on the side of the chevron. The horseman galloped down Beekman Avenue, shop window by shop window. He rode in daylight and in darkness and in the nightmares of their children. Their fondness for the figure became fear, dread, and doubt. Why had they named their town after a ghost story? To name a thing is to give it power, to give it substance and flesh. What had they done? Each sunset, as the village of Sleepy Hollow sank deeper into shadow, more and more former North Terrytowners wondered if embracing the legend hadn't been a mistake. But they had to press forward. The mill wheel turns. Summer ends. Time comes for school to start. The ball glove goes into the closet. Grandfather asks for a jacket. Beer becomes coffee or pumpkin spice. A leaf turns, falls, and twists. The season comes. There's money to be made. Time to unpack the fright masks, to fetch the scarecrow from his firehouse closet. Time to bundle the corn stalks and light the pumpkins. Time for the headless horseman to menace the tourists again.